Hi, my name is Jennifer. Welcome back to my channel. Welcome if you're new as well, because I've had quite a few new subscribers recently. So thank you for joining me. It's lovely to have you here. This is the start of my March wrap up. So how I do my wrap ups, if you've not been here before, is I film clips throughout the month, usually like one a week, talking about the books I've read that week, and then I smush them together at the end of the month for my wrap-up video. The reason I do it like that is because I have quite a poor memory. So if I have to talk about all the books I've read in one go at the end of the month, I would struggle to remember a lot of detail about the books I read, like in the first week, for example. So that's why I do it like this. Saying that, today is the 17th of March and I haven't filmed anything yet. So I have 2 weeks worth of books to talk about. That I just didn't feel up to filming last week, that was why. But I have done quite a lot of reading. So first book I picked up in March was Tomorrow, Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle, Zevin. This has already gone back to the library, so we will insert a picture. I read this for my library book club, and conveniently I'm also reading it for my work book club. We are not meeting, we had the library meeting the other week. The work book club isn't meeting until April. And I think it's very efficient to read one book that covers both book clubs. I was partly influential in it being selected for the work book club, I will admit. So yeah, Tomorrow, Tomorrow and Tomorrow. I really, really liked it actually. It is a book about these two people. I mean, I'm saying people, I can't remember their names. I think one was called Sam. What was the other one's name? I don't know. A boy and a girl. They meet when they are children in hospital. So he is in hospital himself having treatment, and she is there visiting her sister. And so it sparks up a friendship. They are both into gaming and they go on as adults to create video games together, some of which are very, very successful. So the story is really about their lives, their relationship, the way that events lead them to apart at points and come back together and so on. I don't know anything about gaming. I'm not into video games, but that didn't stop me from really, really enjoying the book. So I don't think that matters if you're not into gaming. I guess potentially you might get more out of it if you are, I suppose, but I still really, really enjoyed it. I liked what it said about the nature of friendship and the importance of love between friends, and the value of friendship in itself. I also liked what it did around, and this sounds really cliched, but I thought it was done really well, on sort of drawing comparisons between real life, reality, and the nature of the world within video games. There was one chapter in the book in particular, and I won't go into detail about what happens. The cat is sitting on her tower in the kitchen just staring at me. Yeah, so there's one chapter in particular where there is a bit of a narrative shift, and that chapter I thought was so impactful, so well done. I thought it was incredible. I actually was reading it on the train to London for the booktuber meetup, and it was one of those times where when you've read something and you just sort of sit there for a bit, just like, what have I just read? That chapter I thought was incredible. So overall, I really, really enjoyed the book. I think it's a good book for book club discussion as well, which is helpful because I'm going to be talking about it with 2 book clubs. I think there's lots to get your teeth into, and I really, really enjoyed it. The next book I picked up was a DNF. We're back on our DNF train. It was Helen Black by Oskar Jensen. So it's quite a recent release, and it sounded like it was going to be just my thing. So it's a murder mystery set when a group of friends who were, I think, at college together meet up again as adults in one of their houses. They have like a big isolated house. They meet up again and there's a snowstorm and they're isolated and someone dies. So it's all the kind of thing I love in a book. I actually read just over half of the book, and the reason I DNF'd it in the end was, well, I just didn't think it was very good, to be honest. Like, I read a lot of sort of golden age murder mystery, and I do like some contemporary stuff, and it was sort of trying to be a little bit golden age styly. I just felt like there was a lot of explanation, there was a lot of dialogue that didn't need to be there. The pacing felt a little bit off for me. I actually almost DNF'd it really early on because, and probably I should have done, because the main character, this guy who's going to this like reunion, he is thinking about one of the women that he's going to be seeing again, and it's someone who he either used to date or he had a thing for, and he's sort of wondering, you know, what she'll be like now and stuff like that. And he I can't remember if he says it out loud or he thinks to himself, oh, maybe she's got fat. As if becoming fat is the worst thing that could possibly happen to you, particularly if you're a woman. So when I read that bit, I definitely sat there for a bit debating whether to DNF or not. I decided to continue at that point, but ultimately it was a DNF in the end. The next book I picked up was Notes on a Scandal by Zoe Helle. So this is a reread for me. It was one of the books that I was planning on rereading during 2024. And the reason I picked it up in March was because the Read Good prompt for March by Ben Reads Good was to read a book that inspired an Oscar-nominated film. Right, so there was a film made of Notes on a Scandal. It was nominated for 4 Oscars. It didn't win any, but the nominations included a nomination for Best Actress for Judi Dench and Best Supporting Actress for Cate Blanchett. I have seen the film. I'd like to rewatch it actually because it was a long time ago that I watched it. This book was also longlisted for the Women's Prize and shortlisted for the Booker. And I love it. It's an absolute 5-star book for me. If you are one of those people, and I don't really understand you people, but if you're one of those people who says, you know, I don't mind unlikable characters, but there has to be someone that I want to root for, then don't read this book because it is full of unlikable characters, and that's why I loved it. So our narrator is called Barbara, played by Judi Dench in the film, and she is a teacher. She's worked at the school for a long time. She's a little bit of a loner, doesn't really get on with her colleagues. She sort of says what she thinks, and then this new teacher joins the school. A younger woman called Sheba, who is an art teacher, played by Cate Blanchett in the film, and so she joins the school, and she's married. She has 2 children, and Barbara becomes kind of intrigued by her and wants to sort of develop a friendship with her. We know right from the very first chapter that Sheba has, after she joins the school, has an inappropriate relationship with a pupil, a 15-year-old boy. And the first chapter we have Sheba and Barbara. It's all, you know, people have found out about this. It's all like rightly so kicking off. And the book is Barbara's notes, Barbara's account of events, so Notes on a Scandal. It is full of unlikable characters. It's largely, I guess, about obsession, so both in terms of the relationship between Sheba and this boy, but also largely in terms of Barbara's increasing obsession with Sheba. Barbara's a very funny character, like an unknowingly funny character. She just sort of says what she thinks. We are in her mind. One example is when she's asked to write a report by the head teacher on some school trip that's happened that has gone awry and, you know, not gone to plan. And so she's asked to write this report to sort of reflect on how they might learn from it in future and stuff. And the report that she writes is basically just her saying about this certain boy in particular who is just an absolute nightmare. There's nothing we can do for him. We just need to expel him. And that's her report. And the head's like, that's not what I asked you to do. So that's just an example of the kind of thing that Barbara will do. She is particularly unlikable. I just love this book. I just find it very, very engaging and sort of immersive. I think it's brilliant. And as I say, it was listed for the Booker and the Women's Prize, and the film was Oscar nominated. So it's not just me who loves this book. If you like unlikable characters, then you should absolutely read it. Then, should we go to this one next? Then I read The New Wife by J.P. Delaney. So J.P. Delaney is a contemporary thriller writer. He writes sort of domestic thrillers. He is one of the contemporary authors whose books I always get out from the library, usually pretty much as soon as they come out. I think this came out last year, and I've had it on hold, but I froze my hold, so I'm trying to be a bit more mindful about the library books that I am acquiring, because my main goal for 2024 is to read from my shelves as much as I can. So I'm trying to sort of like pace my library loaning. But I decided this is what I was in the mood for, so I thawed my hold and it arrived. I think this is actually probably my least favourite of J.P. Delaney's books that I've read, and I think I've read all of them. But I quite liked it. What it's about is we have this, our narrator is a young man whose father lives in Spain. Whereabout do they live? Mallorca. And has recently remarried this woman, and the father then dies. So we have our main character, is he called Finn? Finn and his sister Jess. So they get this phone call to say that their father's died, and Finn ends up going out to Mallorca, to the house, to his father's home. He has like some sort of agricultural business, and Finn meets his father's wife, and this woman has an older daughter as well, and it's largely sort of around whether the death of Finn's father was like a natural death. There is some suspicion cast on the new wife and her daughter. It very much put me in mind as I was reading it of My Cousin Rachel by Daphne du Maurier. There are definitely parallels there, and My Cousin Rachel is one of my favourite books, and so I think that partly was what pushed me through in continuing to read it, because there was points where I was a bit like, it's not the best. But yeah, so I continued reading it. I did quite like it overall, but it was kind of just okay. But I did enjoy the My Cousin Rachel sort of parallels. Then, where should we go to next? Then I listened to an audiobook. I am only just getting into audiobooks. I can find them difficult to follow, because I have to really, really concentrate, probably because I'm not used to listening to them. But this audiobook I listened to was the best audiobook I've ever listened to. Granted, I've probably listened to less than 10 audiobooks in my life, but I thought it was incredible. And it's In at the Deep End by Kate Davies. So this is a book that it's been on my radar for probably a couple of years. And I was reminded of it recently because Kate Davies has a new book out called, I think it's called Nuclear Family. It has an egg on the cover. And I know that Charlie from Charlie Brooks Reads picked it up on our London book crawl, you know what I mean. And it was recommended to her by the bookseller, and it's blurbed by Sarah Waters. And anyway, when I looked it up, I realised that the author was Kate Davies, who also had written this other book I already knew I wanted to read. So I picked up the audiobook and I loved it. It was so good. It was very, very close to being a 5-star. Maybe it is a 5-star. I haven't entirely decided, but I absolutely loved it. So it's about this young woman called Julia who, she's got a job. She's had various relationships with men. It's not quite worked out. Anyway, she starts to date a woman. She realises she's gay. Section 28 is alluded to very briefly in the book. Section 28, if you don't know, was a piece of legislation from it certainly covered all the 90s up till the early noughties, I think, that prohibited teachers from really discussing queerness in any way. And so the main character Julia sort of acknowledges in the book that she's probably always known she was gay, but hasn't really ever sort of done anything about it because it just wasn't the thing. So it's about her sort of discovering this, and she starts to date this one woman in particular who introduces her to lots of things that she hasn't done before. It is a pretty spicy book, I will say, and I thought it was very, very funny. So Julia, we hear from Julia's family, her work colleagues. She's in therapy. She has a therapist, and the narrator. There's one narrator but she did different voices for different characters, and it was just brilliant. It was so brilliant, and it was really, really funny. I thought it was really, really funny anyway. But there is also some quite serious sort of topics going on in the background as well, as we come to realise. I just thought it was incredible. Really, really, really good. As a sort of contemporary novel about this one woman and her relationships and her sort of her life. And yeah, I honestly absolutely loved it. So I really need to pick up her new book now. Next up, shall we talk about the Women's Prize for a moment? So, Women's Prize for Fiction. I think it's quite an interesting long list. I haven't done a separate video on it because I don't have like that many thoughts on it. I think it's an interesting long list. What I like about it is there's a lot of debuts on there. I like that there are a few books that seem to be a bit more genre leaning. And, you know, I do think that sometimes genre fiction can be a little bit looked down on. I really, really dislike the term literary fiction. Because I think genre fiction can, of course, have a lot of literary merit. So I do think it's an interesting long list. I will say that when I heard the long list, there were not many of the books that were immediately appealing to me. And that's largely, I guess, some of the themes that seem to be quite common themes and not necessarily things that I'm not interested in, largely around motherhood. So yeah, I myself felt slightly underwhelmed on seeing the list, but I don't think it's a bad list. That's just like a personal preference thing. In terms of the long list, there's one book on there that I have already read, which is Night Bloom by Peace Adzemedi, which I read last year, and I did really enjoy it. It's about two cousins who were really, really close growing up, and then something happens that sort of makes them drift apart, and we see from both their perspectives, and neither of them has fully understood what was going on in the other one's life at the time. And I thought it was very good. I think it's a very Women's Prize book. I think a lot of people will really like it. And then there's one book on the long list which I had already DNF last year. That was Western Lane by Chetna Maru, which was on last year's Booker shortlist. That was why I picked it up. I just wasn't that into it really. That was the reason I DNF'd it. So, my approach this year to reading the Women's Prize, normally what I do is if the books are available from the library, I will just put reserves on all of them, and probably DNF about half of them. And what I'm doing this year is really just picking up the ones that I'm particularly interested in. I'm just not going to bother trying to read ones if I don't think they're going to be for me. I might change my mind about that as I hear more reviews, but that's what I'm thinking at the moment. So anyway, the book from the long list that I was most interested in reading was The Maiden by Kate Foster. I have heard of this before. I'd seen it on my library app, but I hadn't really paid too much attention to it. I think it looks very generic. I think the title is very generic. So it hadn't really stood out to me. It's historical fiction around a murder mystery. It's based on a true story. I thought it was really going to be for me. You may be able to tell by my tone of voice, I have DNF'd the book. I read just over 100 pages. I don't think it's a bad book by any means. It's about a woman, Lady Christian, who is charged with the murder of her lover, who was also her uncle by marriage, and she is going to be beheaded for this crime. And we sort of go back in time and we see what leads up to this death. The book is told by two different narrators. So we have Lady Christian, and there's also someone called Violet, who works in a brothel, and we see sort of how she becomes involved in the story as well. I thought it was fine. The reason I DNF'd it was because, and this is going to sound really like picky, but the characters to me, so I read just over 100 pages, and you get to know the characters, and there were certain actions that to me felt like not in keeping with the character that I had been told about so far. And it just really pulled me out of the story, and I have since looked up like the plot of the book and where it goes, and to a certain extent I can see that now, but I still just, it just didn't feel natural to me. Also, some of the descriptions of certain things were just not to my taste. I kind of rolled my eyes a little bit at points. Not that it was bad writing, but it's just not my style of writing, the kind of thing that I particularly like to read. So that was why I DNF'd it. However, I have finished one of the books on the long list, and this was In Defence of the Act by Effie Black. I had not heard of this book before. I got it on ebook, so I'll put a picture up. I got it on ebook from my work Libby app, and I liked it. I only finished it yesterday, so I'm still sort of mulling it over a little bit. I have mixed feelings, but overall I did really like it. So the main character, whose name, I've only just finished the book, but I can't remember her name. She is I think the term was psychobiologist. So she studies animals who kill themselves, and particularly this species of spider, and she is researching into how the fact that these certain animals do this has an evolutionary benefit, how it can contribute towards the benefit of their species in the long run. And she is sort of attempting to draw parallels between this and humans who take their own life. It's a very short book, but it's quite big in scope. There's a lot going on in there. So as we go on, we understand some of our main characters' backstory, family background, different things that have happened in their life that have led them to form this opinion. I felt like it very much focused on a specific aspect of this theme, and whilst obviously this is like a short novel, so it's not for me to be expecting some grand comprehensive thesis on suicide. However, within the book the character is writing some sort of thesis or something, and so to a certain extent some of what was happening in the plot and the points that were being made felt a little bit simplistic to me. Felt like there wasn't much nuance within there, and for the fact that the narrator is writing some thesis on this, I felt like maybe there should be some acknowledgement of the specific scope of this, because there's a lot that isn't even touched on. So that was my sort of niggle with it. I did really like it. There are these very small one-page chapters interspersed throughout the main chapters called The Black Day, and we know something's happened, we're leading up to something, and obviously we find out what that is. It is quite a difficult book to read in many ways, but part of me feels like it's quite a courageous book to centre this theme in the way that the book does, because I think it's something that we should talk about more. So yeah, I did really like it, albeit I have sort of a few little hesitations that I'm still sort of mulling over. But I'm pleased I read it. I'd never heard of this book before as well, so that's what I do like about a long list like this, because it's not all about the winner, it's about all the books that are listed and bringing those books to a wider readership, particularly those books that maybe are not as well known. So I think that's all the books I've read so far in March. I will check in with you when I've read some more. It's now the end of the month, and I need to update you on what I've read or DNF'd over the last 2 weeks. It's been a pure avalanche of DNFing here in the last 2 weeks of March. I have 4 DNFs to talk about. I have a couple of short stories that I want to mention, one in particular by Toni Morrison that I thought was excellent and will recommend. And then I'll update you on what I've been reading at the moment, but I will just go and get it because it's over there. Okay, so to put this into context and in my defence, I think there's a couple of reasons for all these DNFs. One of them is the fact I keep getting these headaches and it makes it difficult to read physically. So that's where I've been turning more towards audiobooks, which has been working really well for me actually, so that's good, but the headaches are annoying. So that's one reason why, well, for at least one of these DNFs. Also, my mood has been a little up and down over the last couple of weeks, so that has, I think, impacted on my reading and on my enjoyment of what I'm picking up. But anyway, we'll start off with, the first book is a DNF for now, and that's Hummingbird, Salamander by Jeff Vandermeer. So Alice and the Giant Bookshelf read this recently. She said it was really bizarre and she wanted to talk to someone about it. So I read the Southern Reach trilogy last year and thought it was very, very good. So I knew I wanted to read more by Vandermeer. So I thought, well, I'll pick this one up now. I got it from the library. This is what I was reading when I had that headache. Didn't read anything for 3 days, and by that point, it was too much to go back to it. I made it to page 90. I do want to pick this up again at some point, but it is bizarre. I think as the reader, you're meant to have a certain level of confusion on reading this book. I'm not sure if my level of confusion was maybe a bit more than what is to be expected, but it was, yeah, it's a book that you sort of really need to kind of concentrate on, I would say, and now is not the time for Vandermeer. It's about this woman who finds a note leading her with a key to a storage unit, and there's a taxidermied hummingbird in there, and there's directions to a taxidermied salamander, and then there's some sort of hunt quest that she embarks on. I can't really tell you any more than that because this puzzle face is pretty much how I looked on reading those first 90 pages. But I am interested to revisit it because I think Jeff Vandermeer is a really, really interesting writer. So that's a DNF for now. I can go back to the library. The next DNF, I DNF'd it and then I started it again, and now I think I am DNFing it. And it's an audiobook, and it is A Flat Place by Noreen Masud. So this is a memoir which I picked up because it was longlisted for the Women's Prize for Non-Fiction this year. And I did really enjoy it to start with, and then I sort of lost momentum with listening to the audiobook a little bit, so I DNF'd it. Then it made the shortlist, so I was like, I think I'm going to give it another go. I did listen to a little bit more like a few days ago, but I've not really felt compelled to revisit it again. So I think it may be a DNF. Like, I do think it's a good book. It's about, so it's Noreen's memoir. She grew up in Pakistan, then she moved to the UK. And it's about her love of flat places, so physically flat landscapes. But what she does that's really interesting is the sort of parallels she draws between landscapes and trauma. So for example, if you are like in therapy and you're trying to unpick what's caused your trauma, if you look back at your life and there is a mountain there is something significant on the landscape of your past that you can point to and be like, that's it, that's the incident, that's the thing that has caused the trauma. And then you can start to unpick that. But what if when you look back there's just a flat place, nothing is rising above anything else, nothing is particularly standing out from anything else as to being the reason for the trauma. So Noreen in the book talks about being diagnosed with complex PTSD, and I thought that sort of analogy was really, really interesting. So like the introduction to the book for me as sort of a standalone essay, I thought was excellent. And then as we sort of got into the book itself, I kind of lost interest because there is more talk about landscape in itself and sort of history of landscape, and I'm just not that interested in it. So I've kind of got a bit bored. So I think that is going to be a DNF, sadly. The next DNF, I made it, I think, I've already taken this bookmark out about maybe just under halfway through, and it's The Guest by Emma Cline. This is a book that's been on my radar for a while, and I thought it was going to be my kind of thing. I've heard good things about it from other booktubers. I was just bored. It's about this young woman who So she's been living with this guy who's really rich, and they sort of kind of break up. She has nowhere to live. So she uses her wiles to sort of like find places to live. And so, for example, there's one time where there's a big gang of like young people out partying. She sort of attaches herself to them and hopes no one notices that none of them actually know who she is. And, you know, so it's this sort of story. And it was quite low on plot, which is probably why I didn't really like it. Yeah, I was just a bit bored. Again, of course, I'm sure my mood plays into like my reading experience. So on another day, I may have carried on. I thought it was okay. This next DNF, I don't even want to really tell you about, because I've never heard anyone say anything bad about this book, and I'm not going to say anything bad about this book. It's just not for me. I did give it a good go. I made it just under halfway, page 180. And I'm really sorry to everyone that loves this book, but I think it's just not for me. And it's The Long Way to a Small Angry Planet by Becky Chambers. I know, I'm sorry. Yeah. So this is it's sci-fi. It's about the crew of this spaceship, is that the term? Called the Wayfarer, whose task is to punch wormholes in space to like create travel corridors, right? So the crew of this spaceship comprises of humans, but also various aliens. It's very sort of a diverse book. It's queer in many ways. It's very much about the characters rather than the plot, I would say. And I think that's, again, probably why I didn't quite get on with it. I did know going into it that it might not be for me because it's so character focused, and also because I don't really sort of read sci-fi, but everyone loves this book. So I would have actually DNF'd it earlier on if it wasn't for the fact that I was like, I can't DNF this book. I'll get chucked off BookTube. So I did persevere, but yeah, it's just not for me. I saw that Tiffany from Towering TBR did a video recently, which was really good, about Becky Chambers books and about different places you might want to start with Becky Chambers depending on what kind of a reader you are. So I would, I think, be interested in trying some more of Becky Chambers books in different series to see if there's others that maybe are more to my taste. I'll link Tiffany's video down below for you to check out. But yeah, sadly, that's a DNF. So there's a couple of short stories I wanted to mention. I'll mention this one first briefly. So I've been reading some more stories from this massive book. This is The Locked Room Mysteries. It's a anthology of short stories edited by Otto Penzler. And I mean, I went back and picked some of these up again because I literally was like, I don't even know if I like reading anymore. I don't know what I want to read. I feel like everything I pick up, I'm going to DNF. But I knew with these short stories, very sort of plot focused, this is the stuff that I really get on with. So there was one story in particular that I thought was really good and I wanted to mention it. And it was by John Dickson Carr, writing as Carter Dickson, and it was called Blind Man's Hood. So it's about this couple who are driving. It's set on Christmas Eve. They're going to stay with this family. And when they get to the house, the family's not there. For some reason, even though like they were expecting these guests, they're not there. There's this woman in the house, this young woman in the house, who sort of starts to explain to this couple sort of why the family have gone out and different things. And it really stood out to me because it was very, very atmospheric. It felt quite gothic in tone, and I thought it was really, really creepy at points as well. And that's, I think, quite unusual for this type of short story, because, you know, it's very much about the plot, very much about the puzzle. But for this one, it was like the writing really stood out and the atmosphere that was created really, really stood out. So I thought I would mention that as one I would recommend. And then the Toni Morrison short story that I wanted to recommend is called, and I struggle to pronounce this, Recitatif. I'll put a picture up. I listened to it on audiobook. I thought it was very, very good. It's one that I definitely want to revisit, and I think I'll get more out of it on a reread. So I listened to the audiobook. The audiobook that I listened to was 2 hours in total, but the first hour was an introduction by Zadie Smith. So I think it was actually an essay that Zadie Smith wrote, because when I looked it up, it came up, it was in, it might have been in like the New Yorker or something that she'd written. So the first hour was this introduction by Zadie Smith, and ordinarily I wouldn't read or listen to the introduction before reading the book. However, I did in this instance, mainly because when I was listening to the audiobook, I was lying on bed with a face mask on, with eye masks on. And when the introduction started, I did think to myself, should I skip the introduction? And I was like, I just can't be bothered like moving. So I listened to it. And I think you could look at it both ways. And when I've looked at reviews on Storygraph who have listened to this edition I did, some people have said it really works listening to the introduction first, because it does sort of put stuff in context. When you read it, you're going into it with an understanding of sort of the outline of the story and things to look out for and stuff. But then other people have said, obviously it does sort of tell you some of what's going to happen in the story, so you might want to listen to it afterwards. And what I would actually say is I'd probably encourage you to maybe pick it up without knowing too much about it. So the story is really, really fascinating. It's an excellent story, but there's one certain aspect about the story which is really, really interesting, and Toni Morrison has done something very, very clever with it. I'm sure it's pretty well known, but if you don't know sort of this key aspect of the story, I'd really be interested if you were to read it without knowing that, and then to hear sort of what your thoughts on it are. I can tell you sort of briefly what it's about. It's about two young girls called Twyla and Roberta. It's told from Twyla's perspective, and they meet at an orphanage, and then it's sort of about their friendship, their lives, their relationship, their sort of different backgrounds, looks at sort of privilege, race and class, and also childhood memory. So it is a really, really excellent story, but there is a key part that I am not telling you that you might want to go into it not knowing. If you like Google the book though, be warned, it may well, you may well find out what this thing is without even really trying too hard to look for it. So that's just a warning, but that's why I don't really want to say too much. But I think it's really, really fascinating what Toni Morrison does. Apparently this is her only published short story. And yeah, I thought it was really, really excellent. And then I thought I would tell you what I'm reading at the moment. At the moment, I am reading Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I am maybe just over a third of the way through. 188 I'm on. And I am enjoying this. I'm finding it a little bit slow going, if I'm being honest. So I read The Martian ages ago and quite enjoyed it. But I've been wanting to read Project Hail Mary for a while, because every time I hear anyone talk about this book on YouTube, people are very, very careful not to say too much about it. And that really intrigues me, because I'm the kind of person who's like, okay, you guys are not telling me something. What are you not telling me? I want to read it and find out, okay? So it's about, it's about a guy in space. Of course it is, it's Andy Weir. I've got to a bit which is quite interesting. I'm keen to see how it's going to go. But I'll save full thoughts for April's wrap-up. Hopefully in April I'll manage to sort of finish a few more books than I have done in the last couple of weeks. So I think that's everything for March. In April, I think, so I have picked up quite a lot of library books in March, I think, for various reasons. I think in April I'm going to try and focus on reading from my shelves. I know Katie Lumsden from Books and Things is running a TBR sort of Clearout Readathon type thing. I can't remember the title. I'll link Katie's video down below, where, you know, you're encouraged to sort of read books from your TBR. So I'm going to try, I think, and read sort of books from my shelves as much as I can, rather than books from the library, but we will see how that goes. Anyway, thank you for watching. Let me know if you've been reading any good books that you would recommend to me. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Bye.